It happened yesterday evening. Nothing dramatic. Just the sound of the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and the ticking of the clock above the stove. I was sitting at the table with a cup of tea that had already gone cold. The house was quiet in that familiar way. It's been quiet for years. And for some reason, I caught myself listening. Not for the clock, not for the refrigerator, for footsteps, for someone moving in the other room. But of course, no one was there. I sat there longer than I meant to, staring at the empty chair across from me, and the thought came back again. The same thought that's been visiting me more often lately. How did two people who once talked about everything end up living inside so much silence? My name is Daniel. I'm 73 years old. I've lived in this same house for nearly 40 years. Raised two children here. Watched them run through the hallway, slam doors, argue over the television. Back then, the house was never quiet. Now sometimes the silence feels like another person sitting in the room. I suppose that's why I'm speaking now. Not because I think anyone needs advice. And not because I imagine my story is special. It's just that when you get to this age, you start noticing the things that disappeared without you realizing it. And one of the things that disappeared in my life was the sound of us. Her name was Margaret. I met her when I was 26. She worked at the local library, a small brick building near the town square. I remember the first time I saw her. She was standing on a step stool, reaching for a book on the top shelf. Her hair kept falling forward, and she kept brushing it away with the back of her hand. I had come in looking for a book about fixing old engines. She climbed down from the stool, looked at the paper in my hand, and smiled. "Second aisle," she said. "But I think that one's missing a few pages." She said it like she was letting me in on a secret. That was the beginning. At first it was small things. Walking together after the library closed. Coffee at the diner down the street. Talking about where we grew up, the families we came from, the strange little habits we carried from childhood. Margaret talked easily. She had a way of filling quiet spaces without making them feel crowded. I wasn't like that. I've never been a man who says a lot. Back then, I thought that was just my nature. Something fixed. Something that didn't need examining. When we got married, we moved into a small apartment with yellow wallpaper that peeled at the corners. We didn't have much. A couch someone gave us, a second-hand kitchen table. But we talked every night, long conversations about nothing important. What kind of dog we might get someday. Whether we should paint the bedroom walls. What our children might look like if we ever had them. Those were easy years. Not because life was simple, but because we spoke. We said what was on our minds before the day ended. Then life started filling up. Work got busier. I took on longer hours at the garage. Margaret stayed at the library after we had our first child. Nights became shorter. Conversations became smaller. I would come home tired. She would be folding laundry or helping our daughter with homework. Long day. She'd ask, "Yeah," I'd say, and that would be enough. At least that's what I told myself. Years passed like that. 2 children, a mortgage, repairs around the house, school meetings, birthday parties. The usual shape of a life. Margaret still talked. She would tell me stories from the library. About the elderly man who came in every Thursday. About the little boy who always checked out books about dinosaurs. I listened, but I didn't always answer. Not because I didn't care. I just thought listening was enough. Sometimes she would ask questions. "Do you ever think about moving somewhere quieter? Or do you ever wonder what we'll do when the kids are grown?" Questions like that. Questions that opened doors. But I had a habit of standing in the doorway without stepping through. "I don't know," I'd say. Or sometimes I'd just nod. I never noticed the way those moments stacked up. One quiet evening after another. One unfinished conversation after the next. Margaret started talking less. It didn't happen suddenly. It was gradual, like watching a light dim over time. At first, I thought she was just tired. Life was busy. Kids were teenagers. Everyone was stretched thin. Then one night, I remember sitting on the couch while she read a book beside me. The television was on, but muted. The room was filled with a kind of silence that felt heavier than usual. I looked over at her. She didn't look upset, just distant, like someone waiting for a train that might not come. I thought about saying something, asking her what she was thinking. But the moment passed. and I let it pass. Years later, after the children moved out, the house became quieter. That's when the silence really settled in. You would think two people alone together would talk more, but something had already shifted by then. Margaret spent more time in the garden. I spent more time in the garden. Evenings were predictable. Dinner, dishes, television, bed. Not unhappy, just quiet. Too quiet. One night, she said something that stayed with me. We were sitting at the kitchen table. The window was open, and the sound of crickets was coming in from outside. She said softly, almost to herself, "Do you remember how much we used to talk?" I laughed a little. "Yeah," I said. "We were younger then." She nodded. But the look in her eyes told me she hadn't meant it as a joke. That moment comes back to me often now, because I realized something I didn't understand then. She wasn't asking about the past, she was asking about the present. And I answered like it didn't matter. Margaret passed away 8 years ago. Heart trouble. It happened quicker than any of us expected. In the hospital room, there were so many things I thought about saying. Memories I wanted to revisit. Questions I should have asked years earlier. But the words felt strange in my mouth, like tools I hadn't used in too long. I held her hand. We talked a little. About the kids, about the garden. Normal things. The kind of things you say when you're pretending the moment isn't final. After she was gone, the house changed in a way I still can't explain. Not just quieter, different. Every room seemed to hold a memory of a conversation that never happened. Sometimes I sit in the living room and remember the sound of her voice filling the space. I remember the questions she asked, the doors she opened, and the way I stood there, thinking silence was harmless. I used to believe silence meant peace, that if there were no arguments, no raised voices, everything must be fine. But silence has its own way of growing. It spreads slowly, until one day you realize the space between two people has become a kind of distance. Not anger, not bitterness, just distance. And distance can live in the same house for years without anyone naming it. Now when I sit at the kitchen table in the evening, I sometimes imagine what those conversations might have sounded like if I had stepped through those doors. If I had asked more questions. If I had answered hers with more than a shrug. But imagination is a quiet place. It doesn't change what already happened. I don't think Margaret blamed me. She was never the kind of person who kept score. But I can see now that she slowly stopped expecting something that never arrived. Words, presence, a voice meeting her halfway. I spent years believing that love was something you proved by staying, by working hard, by keeping the house running. But there's another part of it I didn't understand until much later. Something simple, something quiet. And by the time I understood it, the person I needed to say it to was gone. These days, the clock in my kitchen ticks a little louder than it used to. Maybe it always sounded like that. Maybe I just never listened closely before. When you get to 73, time feels different. Not faster, just more visible. Like you can finally see the shape of the years behind you. And sometimes you notice the empty spaces between them. The spaces where conversations should have lived. I don't sit here wishing my life had been different. Margaret and I shared many good years, laughter, children, ordinary moments that meant more than I realized at the time. But I do carry a quiet understanding now, that two people can love each other for decades, and still slowly let the quiet replace them. My name is Daniel. I'm 73 years old, and sometimes, when the house is especially still, I find myself wondering what Margaret might have said if I had simply asked. If this story reminds you of someone, or a moment you remember differently now, you're welcome to share it, or just sit with the thought for a while. Sometimes listening is enough.